Order, and welcome all to today's third evidence session on the committee's UK Freeports inquiry. Quite a timely day to be having Freeports again today, because I think the media has been reasonably full with government talks about Freeports and government pronouncements on Freeports, so it's topical. And we've got four witnesses today. We've got Chris Starkey, Roger Pollen, Roy McGregor and Tim Williams, and I'll ask each in that order to introduce themselves, name, rank and serial number on their own terms, starting first with Chris, of course.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Chris Starkey. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership, which covers the counties of Norfolk and Suffolk.
Thanking you. Roger Pollen.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Roger Pollen. I'm Head of External Affairs with the Federation of Small Businesses in Northern Ireland. We've about 6,000 members here across Northern Ireland.
Thank you. Good to have you too. Roy McGregor.
It's Roy McGregor, Chairman of Global Energy Group, based in the Highlands of Scotland and the Northeast. Thank you.
Fantastic. Very good to have you indeed, Mr. McGregor.
Nice to hear a Kent voice.
Good. And finally, but last but by no means least, of course, Tim Williams.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tim Williams. I'm a director at the Welsh Automotive Forum. The Forum is the trade body for automotive manufacturers in Wales.
Thank you. Thank you all for giving up your time this afternoon. It's much appreciated. This question is to everybody, but I'll start with Chris Starkey first. I mean, how would the UK government's Freeport policy impact the businesses and regions you represent, Mr. Starkey?
So we're broadly supportive of the Freeports policy. We see it as an opportunity to stimulate additional trade and investment, particularly around exports. We think that on their own, customs measures, as promoted, wouldn't be enough of an incentive, and we need the opportunity and the possibility of a rounded package of support and incentives to encourage greater investment. So we think it could have an opportunity to stimulate manufacturing, particularly in coastal areas nearest ports, but also to feed through to the wider supply chain. We think there are opportunities to link with skills provision in local areas through to Freeports, innovation as well, and R&D development. But for the policy to be really successful, we think it should be keyed in and aligned with the existing enterprise zone policy.
Thank you very much. I'll now go maybe to Roger Pollen. And unmute if you can.
It wasn't responding there, Chair. Yeah, I think very similarly here, our members have been quite clear that we're at a very unusual position, I suppose, post 31st of December, where we will have an opportunity to face into two different markets. And I think there's a sense that the Freeports policy could create a real stimulus that draws together a lot of the talent and capacity within Northern Ireland, but gives it a new platform to work from. I think for probably two generations, Northern Ireland has lagged badly behind. It's lost the place it used to have in terms of economic output. It's done well in terms of inward investment, but it's still lagging. We've got a very strong competitor south of the border that's got a differential tax rate. It's got a number of other benefits down there. I think there's a sense right across the membership that if we got the right sort of Freeport policy, and we'll maybe touch on that later about how it could be centred and located, that it would give a really good boost to a whole lot of things that would draw together manufacturing, the knowledge economy and everything else. And also the Northern Ireland's unique position where it is, as I say, facing into those two markets. So broadly, enthusiasm for the potential of what it could offer.
Thank you. And Roy McGregor, I don't think I've seen Roy McGregor since 4.5 years ago when Ross County beat Hibs in the cup. I think that's maybe a happy memory to start you off with, Mr. McGregor. But we're moving on to the question at hand.
Thank you, Angus. Good start. Well, I suppose I'm coming from a different angle as a private employer that is the biggest private employer in the Highlands and one of the biggest in Scotland. I suppose we're mainly in oil and gas, but have been making the transition to renewables with some of the fields in Scotland in particular. I suppose we've been on this journey with the Scottish Government from 5 years, and we're just about to announce tomorrow $100 million investment in a renewable factory, third biggest in Europe at Nigg on the Cromarty Firth. And key to that sort of investment, and with a lot of government money, is the ability to trade both with Europe post-Brexit and to trade with a supply chain that can be developed round a hub. So very much for the new industry and that new transition, it's pretty critical that a lot of the stuff that's involved with Freeports is given the benefit to this area. We are an enterprise zone as well, so we're uniquely positioned to do that, and that could be in a wide area that includes Western Isles and Arnish and that. So I think it's very critical for private employment and for actually making a case. I was involved at the start of the oil industry 40 years ago, and how that regenerated the hinterland, particularly in the north of Scotland. We're seeing the levelling and the slightly change of emphasis to non-fossil fuels, and we want to be right at the centre of this new industrial revolution, and it's probably pretty critical for this investment that we're able to trade, and we're able to trade at the right conditions with the rest of Europe in particular, because some of the products that we do are only made in Europe, as far as some of the nacelles and some of the things that are in components. So having that ability to invest that amount of money in Scotland is pretty critical to wrapping it around the Freeport.
And I was just going to get that point. A Freeport in the north around Inverness, that Murray Firth basins would be useful to you think?
Yes, and it could be extended to the west coast as well in a geographical area. You know the difficulty in your own constituency there, Angus. So I think the geography in this thing is not so much whether it's 50 miles to the west is not important, but really important for this hub. And we've been waiting on. We are involved at the moment in 3 of the wind farms of creating them, but not in a manufacturing hub. And it's the manufacturing hub that is key to as wanting a Freeport in this area.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. And now Tim Williams.
Thank you, Chair. The automotive industry in Wales is spread across Wales, predominantly in south, but it does cover the whole of Wales. So location of where a Freeport might be would have a pretty serious effect on who's advantaged and who's disadvantaged. And I think this is an area where, from a Welsh Government point of view, they have to decide on which is the right area that we give the biggest bang for the buck, as it were, in terms of advantage for Wales. Our automotive industry, obviously, depending now on the outcome of transition, we're all waiting to see if there's deal, no deal, what the tariff might be. Is it world trade, or is there a deal to be had? That would have a big impact on the automotive industry, which in principle supplies the UK and European automotive markets. So at the moment, transition would have a big effect, which would mean if there was a Freeport in one location, what would be the advantage of that compared to the additional cost for having a Freeport versus logistic costs of movement of goods in and out? I think the area that is of great interest for Wales would be in the area of energy. I think energy is a critical one across Wales, and there are projects that could be linked around energy. Of course, we do have potential for new technologies in terms of the automotive industry. We're working with a company in terms of a gigafactory that could cluster companies around an area. So I think there's a great potential for that. But I think the advantage, disadvantage of where a Freeport goes, bearing in mind that we could have Bristol nearby to us, of course, as much as Liverpool in the northeast. So location for me is a very big question, but no doubt that a Freeport, as has been shown across the world in many areas, has distinct advantage. But I think there's a lot of questions to ask, and certainly from a Welsh perspective, of where that would be and why it would be there.
Interesting questions, and given the mention of Wales there, I think it's only probably correct that I move at this stage to a fine Welsh MP of the same surname, Craig Williams. Craig, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Chair. I think picking up on Roy and Tim's points, well, whether I can ask the targeting in Freeports, should it be to areas that have existing specialities already? Would that be beneficial? If so, how would you see that achieved? But building on the points you both made about geographical location and whether we should be looking at what skills and assets and companies we currently have when we locate Freeports. Tim, I can see you nodding. As the chair uses his special ability being Scottish with witnesses, I'm going to go to Tim first, I think.
Well, thanks very much, Craig. Yes, this is a question that has to be now gone into it. We have to do cost-benefit analysis. We have to do some research. There isn't a one-size-fits-all or a location that is definitely the one to go to. So I think there are a number of places. We could be looking at energy. We could be looking at potential for around electrification of the transport and motor industry here in Wales. And there are locations for that. But I think for me, as a sector current, then I think it would be hard to say that it would directly benefit the automotive industry here in Wales, but I could see areas where it could help on that energy front and also very much in the new technology area, which would effectively bring in new skills, new inward investment. So there would be a multiplier effect for that given area. But there's a lot of data that has to be gathered, certainly from our perspective for Wales, I think, before we go into the next phase of looking at where it should be.
Roy, did you want to build on that?
Yeah, I think probably, I'm speaking both from a traditional industry that's been, important to Scotland for 40 years in oil and gas. But I'm also making a transition, a bit like your car industry, to a new industry that we have a lot of European competitors against the Danes with Esberg, the Antwerps, we've got GE in France. If we want to compete, as our Prime Minister has said yesterday, and have every home in the UK with wind power or wind electricity within 10 years, it's the new industry that I'm focusing on. We have the skills, we have the site, we have that, and if Scotland wants to play its part there, we need to look to the future and not the past, and make sure that our infrastructure and our supply chain round our region is built for the next 40 years. So, that is it's not the old industry that I'm looking at, it's the new industry, and that transition that's really important for my area and for Scotland. And, I started here by creating a yard with 5,000 people from a greenfield thing. This was farmers and bakers and candlestickmen that became and led the oil industry. I feel we're touching a new industry that's going to be involved with hydrogen, with wind, with CO2, and we have the innovation, we have the diversification. We're in a deprived area, and we're just hungry to get the opportunity to be equal with our cohorts in Europe, and we need to be equal if we're going to develop this industry.
That's very interesting. So you see this as looking at what kind of skills and certain companies you have in a region at the moment, and using the Freeport policy as speeding it up or transitioning to whatever is the next fourth industrial revolution, for want of a better phrase.
That's exactly where I am. With COVID, we have created an industrial revolution. We are, with the transition to our green economy and to where we're going, needs to speed up. And the UK content, which is the big thing, we are being left behind against Freeports and manufacturing in Europe in this industry. We need this not only in Scotland, but in other areas of the UK, Wales, north of England. We need to have that ability to operate in Freeport environments to be able to compete with our European partners.
Thanks, Chair. Unless Roger or Chris wanted to come in.
Thank you. I think from Northern Ireland perspective, we approach it in a similar way, and I think Roy puts out a lot of really good points there. But our sense is that we don't want to be overly prescriptive from the centre and try and work out how should design a response at the centre and then impose it. I think there's a real sense within Northern Ireland that there are a lot of different parts that have different strengths, and if we can set up the right framework around that, and then let industry and let private sector work within that and respond to that and create the innovations. Because we may be designing something now that is completely unrelated to what we might be looking at in 5 or 10 years' time anyway. So we don't want to try and constrain new industries by getting a centralized design imposed at this stage. So our model very much looks at the ability to share out the benefits in different centres around Northern Ireland and respond to where the strengths are. In many ways, partly because of the politics of here and also because of the size of the place. We don't want to create local distortions. We want to actually just create an opportunity for people to respond to the markets that they find and the opportunities that they see.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Chris, you want to come in?
Just briefly, if I may, Chair, I was going to make the point that the policy isn't entirely clear as to whether there should be 10 Freeports, and 10 is an interesting number. And I noticed from the consultation they haven't responded to the question of 10 or not, unless I've missed that in the document. 10 would predicate you would go to the largest 10, the biggest 10, which might or might not be the right 10. And is it a policy that is around stimulating the biggest impact on those locations, or is it better placed as a regional policy which would have an impact on a particular worthy region with a particularly strong bid? It's not entirely clear. Both could work. Our concern, I suppose, representing England, is that there will be quite a lot of locations that won't succeed, and the danger of displacement between particularly along the east coast. If you take from the northeast through Humber through the east coast where we cover is, of course, where oil and gas was discovered back in the 60s, and then all the investment and so on went north up to Aberdeen and so on from Great Yarmouth. So likewise, we're determined to work with Roy and others on the offshore wind revolution and so on. So for us, the choice is going to be interesting. We would ask it to ensure that it's a transparent process, and that places that feel like they're on a promise, we would want some clarity from government that there will be an equal and open process for applications.
Thank you very much. I did note that Roy had quite a lengthy list there of those who built the oil industry in the north, and of course I'm sure the next one was going to be Crofters from the west coast was going to be mentioned, but leaving that as it is at the moment, I don't want to go down that line too much. Taiwo Otatemi, you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. My question is about the benefit that Freeports offer businesses. So, Roger, what benefits do you think the Freeports offer businesses in terms of custom procedures and paying for duties? And do you think these benefits vary by sector?
I think that that's an open question in some ways in local terms, because we don't yet know the relationship between the UK and the EU after the end of the year. But I think Northern Ireland has ambition to export around the world. And I think that in some ways, almost irrespective of a free trade agreement between the EU and the UK, and irrespective of the Northern Ireland Protocol, there's an opportunity to use Freeports effectively for I suppose really for sourcing and manufacturing and re-exporting again outside of those territories to the rest of the world. I think it creates a great opportunity there for us. We've spoken with members just really in the last few days, just in advance of coming in here, also to look at what their investment intentions would be were this policy not to come into play or not to be easily accessible in Northern Ireland. And generally the sense has been that businesses here will make investments under the cloak of this policy, if you like, that they would not otherwise make. So they see it as being very much a stimulatory thing. Sorry, could you just repeat the second part of your question there?
And do the benefits vary by sector?
Yes, they probably will. And again, this is just trying to put a few lines in the water with members and see what they say. But obviously, depending on what products are being brought in to produce, so whether it's large-scale heavy manufacturing, of which we have quite a lot here and have an appetite to have more, or whether it's drawing on the sort of IT economy that we've been developing very successfully here in cybersecurity and so on, like this, and linking that with the knowledge centres that we have in Belfast, up in the northwest in Derry, Londonderry. Yes, there's definitely quite a big difference across the sectors, but nonetheless, I think that's where if we get the structure right, and then let those businesses see how they respond to the opportunities that they find within the context of that structure, that's where the really exciting development will come from.
Thank you. And Chris, have you got anything to add to that?
So I'd agree that there will be a difference in sectors, and I think that may help in terms of the selection process. The concept of Freeports particularly works for manufacturing goods and so on, and there's an opportunity for exporting. So clearly, bids which connect those, the opportunity to maybe to reshore manufacturing, and as Roger said earlier, then export as well. So I think it's a particular focus on those sectors.
Thank you. And Chair, I hope I'm allowed to ask just an extra question.
Oh, go on.
Thank you. Tim, how likely are Freeports to generate duty savings, and is this a key consideration for business in deciding where they're going to locate at a Freeport? Sorry.
Was that to me? I didn't quite hear. Yep.
So how likely are Freeports to generate duty savings, and is this a key consideration for businesses in deciding if they are going to locate to a Freeport?
I think going forward, definitely. If I take our industry here in Wales, it's very much dependent on the UK automotive industry. We supply components from Wales into the likes of Jaguar Land Rover, to Nissan, Toyota, Bentley, Aston Martin, etc. It's up to those companies to have that ability. 80% of car output from the UK is exported. 50% of that 80% goes to Europe. So we're sort of dependent in that sense in current phase of export activity. When we go forward into new technologies, I think the opportunities open up massively. And therefore the attraction of companies coming into Wales and other parts of the UK, of course, the opportunity of having that Freeport really gives them a reason to come. And I think that's the comparative advantage that companies look for when making location decisions. Certainly that's our experience.
Thank you. And Roy, have you got anything to add to that?
Nope. That's fine. Are we ready to move on? Okay, thank you. Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. In the first instance, my question is to Chris Starkey. How are local enterprise partnerships supporting Freeport bids in England, and what assessment has been made of the risks of displacement of activity from enterprise zones to Freeports?
So in the consultation process, government was keen for local enterprise partnerships across England to play a part, and I know that my colleagues have been working closely with different partners across England. In some cases, leading bids, in other cases, supporting bids, and the same is true of mayoral combined authorities as well. So for local enterprise partnerships, I would add mayoral combined authorities to that where they exist. In terms of lessons learned, we think there are some very helpful lessons to be learned from the enterprise zone policy. And to pick up your particular point on displacement, I know at your previous session you had a witness from the Centre for Cities, which published a report on enterprise zones. I have to say, local enterprise partnerships weren't involved in that particular report, and were quite surprised as its outcome. We done our own research, and there is some limited displacement within enterprise zones, but by in the main, there are new additional jobs that have been created across the piece. In terms of the core issue about displacement, it's would businesses just would they move internally or move to take advantage of the benefits? Well, the benefits for enterprise zones are relatively modest. For a multinational company, an intervention of about 250,000 is unlikely to mean they're going to move their business lock, stock and barrel to take advantage of the incentive. What we found is where businesses have moved, it's only been on a growth basis. In other words, they're moving because they need more space or more to invest in more facilities and so on. So displacement, I think, is a really important characteristic and thing to be aware of, and certainly it should be one of the key criteria that are used to assess bids coming in. In other words, that we should be looking to minimise displacement.
Would either of the other witnesses like to comment?
Thank you, Martin. Tim here. Yes, and I think the points made by Chris there in terms of displacement, well made. We have a number of enterprise zones across Wales. If there is opportunity at sort of geographic location that a Freeport could be linked to enterprise zones, I think that's something that could be an attraction. But it depends then on movement of goods, logistic costs to get from port to, say, an enterprise zone. So it's this cost-benefit analysis, I think, that has to be done before we can make a sort of a definitive statement about how this would work in a round of Freeport and enterprise zone. Enterprise zones have been sort of modestly successful, I think, in Wales. And I sit on one of the boards for an enterprise zone, so I have first-hand experience of this. And I guess later on we'll be discussing the impact of business rates and that sort of element into a free port or a free zone attached area. So I think displacement is certainly a question mark, but we have to take the positive out of this, that we're creating something for us to do something with, and whilst it could be a clean sheet of paper, then this is writing the future, and I think the points made by Roy earlier on very well made in that sense, that this is about perhaps future rather than looking at how do we support and create anchorage for our existing companies, whilst at the same time creating new opportunities and new technologies, green energy, etc.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
anyone else wish to comment? Yes, Roland.
Yeah, can I just come in and, as I am an enterprise zone in my area, I think it's very much complementary. I don't think there's a displacement issue with enterprise zones because the advantages are not there. I see that the focus is on preparing new jobs and not displacing work from one area to another. I think the focus must be on new areas of growth and being able to be competitive against, for us, Europe in new industries. And I see that the green industry is one, and I see the car industry having to make that challenge of making that transition. And I think it's new jobs that we should be looking at rather than displacing jobs from one area to another.
Thank you. Roger, did you want to comment at all?
Not on that point, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Martin Vickers. Just Chris Starkey momentarily, can I just come back in before I bring in Mark Garney, and if we can just have a brief exchange here, due to time, of course. Is there a fear that if you don't get the Freeport status, or if somebody doesn't get a Freeport status, is the fear so much you don't have the Freeport and the tariff and all that benefit, or is one of the fears that people have is losing out on the government incentives that go along with the Freeport?
So talking to the port operators, they're a fiercely competitive bunch, as I'm sure you already know.
We've gathered a bit of that.
Yeah, so there's the issue about an unlevel playing field. So let's say you're your main competitor doesn't have to be in the same geography, but your main competitor gains Freeport status, and you don't. All other things being equal, you're now at a competitive disadvantage.
So if you were given the same government bung, if you like, for lack of a better word, but just the same lump of cash as the Freeport guys, so we just change one variable here. We're not changing the Freeport and the cash, we're just changing the Freeport. How would that be for the competitor?
I suppose it would depend on the package that's available at a Freeport, and to an extent, what is the kind of overall wrapper? Because there's the cash, and how we think Freeports would work best as a kind of part of an integrated policy piece. So there's the cash and so on is one thing. There's the additional opportunity for investment in infrastructure is another thing. Then there would be local incentives as well. So look, it could work. A competitor could effectively do, and there have been examples of enterprise zone lights that are basically enterprise zones in everything but name, and that has worked. So it could work, but I'm not sure it would be ideal.
Thank you. I hope it didn't take too long there. Mark Carney.
Thanks, Chairman. It's slightly strayed into an area I was going to pick up on. Chris Stark, if I can carry on with you.
I hope I was complimentary and not stomping you all over it, but.
Angus, we work very well together. Industry and all the rest of it. Chris Starkey, sorry, if I can carry on with you. There's a lot of sort of preoccupation with the fact that free trade ports are adjacent to ports, be they airports or marine ports. But actually, you represent the automotive industry, and you represent the local enterprise partnership. Sorry, I've got to come to Tim Williams for his views. So listen carefully to the question, Tim. But the important point is that actually, why do you necessarily have to have a free trade port adjacent to a port? I mean, actually, if you've got a hub of economic activity that is involved in the international marketplace, surely it makes sense to have a free trade port around a manufacturing hub rather than necessarily being transfixed by being next to a port.
And I think that's an incredibly valid point. So take an example from our area. So the Port of Felixstowe is on the east coast, but is pretty much the gateway for goods coming into the Midlands and the north. In fact, more container traffic comes in from the Port of Felixstowe and serves the Northern Powerhouse than all of the Northern Powerhouse ports put together. So actually, there's some logic in having, and we've considered this as an opportunity and an option, Felixstowe as a free port, but actually with a hub in the Midlands, in the concentration around Northamptonshire, Daventry, and so on, where the warehouse manufacturing and so on is. And so I think that's a very live concept. I'm not sure the response from government necessarily would support that, but we would certainly be in favour of the flexibility, the innovation, and opportunities to have I suppose multimodal sites, and indeed maybe bringing in airports as well, or other, or even rail hubs as well. So there is a real opportunity to be genuinely innovative in this.
If I may, that was the kind of the point Roy McGregor might have been making in the beginning. I'm not certain, but I mean, sorry, Mark Carney, he'll speak for himself when you come to him. But I was wondering if that was the point.
Well, can I develop the point, Angus, and then maybe
you better do it.
and leap in at the last minute if I miss anything. But actually, Chris, in your answer, the one thing that slightly alarmed me was when you talked about warehousing, because actually I think the whole point about free trade ports is not to have bonded warehouses, but to have economic activity and value adding. You're on mute, Chris.
Yes, sorry. Absolutely. No. I appreciate what you're saying, and actually, the benefit really is about manufacturing, not in simply shifting goods around. But the Midlands is where there's concentrated automotive production and so on, and manufacturing. So I'd accept that point. No, warehousing would be a bad example.
Segueing very neatly to Tim Williams on the automotive sector, because again, I mean, this is probably really where it's going to make a big difference, because I think 3.5% for parts and components, 10% for finished vehicles, but actually, how many manufacturers are next to a case? I suppose Nissan is, but if you look at the Midlands or other parts of the country, you have big engineering hubs where they manufacture cars. Surely, it's much more useful to put the free trade ports within that manufacturing sector than just be obsessed by a port.
So long as you can put it alongside each one of the manufacturers, I think you're probably right, Mark. I think this is where, how do you advantage one area or one group of companies against another across the patch? I mean, I totally agree. I think certain areas could be looked at, and if you look at someone like Ford, Ford at Bridgend sadly closed its doors a couple of weeks ago and stopped engine production. Now, they, by definition, could bring in a huge amount of componentry to make an engine and export it. they could almost become a Freeport area in their own right. Dagenham probably would say equally the same, that they produce engines, but a lot of it is exported. So therefore, they could almost be considered as a Freeport in their own entity. They're not a port, obviously, but they're a specific geographic location. So I think the concept around clustering port, as we describe it, but zone perhaps is the other word to use here, could have merit, so long as this is a fair playing field. Because I know when I've talked about Freeports across Wales and said that one area could be advantaged as a Freeport area, I get a lot of people saying, well, what about me? Where's my advantage in all of this? Now, okay, you could argue best of both worlds here, that we do have a port that is a Freeport, but satellited to that Freeport. We come back perhaps to enterprise zones or geographic locations of cluster around certain specific manufacturing sectors. I think that's a fair question that you ask, and I think something that we should be looking at. And if it's to save the auto industry, then you can't say that one manufacturer has advantage over another. That's unfair competition. So I think...
Just sorry, because actually there's something which I'm also very interested in hearing your point of view on, and that is there's this sort of idea that we could be, robbing Peter to pay Paul in terms of pinching people out of free enterprise zones into free ports. If you follow this idea through of having them where they're useful rather than necessarily by force. But actually, if you mash the two together and you then had not only a free trade port, but then brought about some of the advantages you have from the enterprise zone. So, for example, the business rate reduction, the planning grants that you have, and all the rest of it. Would then you be kind of finally coming up with something that is really super useful to certain sectors of the manufacturing industry and indeed certain areas which need a boost in terms of building economic activity? Ben, why don't you?
I think you can. I think you come into this area of anchorage for existing companies versus the opportunity around new technologies and the opportunity to bring in new investment around the new technologies. And I think this is a difficult balance to try and strike here. And maybe there's opportunity for a blend of both. But I think, as we've been discussing today, really the idea and the opportunity here around Freeport, if it's linked to an enterprise zone or not, is this creation of new opportunity, as well as trying to balance and help anchor existing companies. And certainly from an Automotive Wales point of view, most of our companies here are international. And sadly, we've seen Ford go. We're going to have the impact of Honda on the supply chain here in Wales as well, obviously around the whole Swindon area. So I think this is balance about, does a Freeport secure and anchor existing, or does it do both of trying to do that as well as create new opportunities for new industries and including green energy as well?
Yeah. Chris, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I would agree with Tim's comments, and our approach and our suggestion really is that you take the best bits of enterprise zones, you continue and maybe reboot that policy and blend that with the free ports as well. And I think you actually then you start to have an integrated policy that can benefit the whole of the United Kingdom, as opposed to 10 particular locations. Undoubtedly, free ports will bring benefits to those 10 locations. How do you then blend some of the other benefits and so on and feed through to the supply chain? Because ultimately, free ports will be successful to the port operators, of course, if it puts more goods and services through their ports. But actually, we wanted to do more than that. How do we stimulate our own manufacturing base? How do we stimulate exports? And you'll do that if you feed through to the supply chain, and that supply chain companies can benefit, possibly by being located in enterprise zones or in the free ports themselves. And I think we think there's an opportunity to have a close correlation between the two and have a really relatively low cost policy, because one of the unstated successes of enterprise zones is just how good value for money it's been. Cost per job, our analysis of about £10,000 per job. And it's also enabled in many parts of the country to link innovation and R&D centres to enterprise zones. And you start to suddenly have a much more of an integrated policy that free ports, if you sort of forgive the pun, feel like a sort of island of of 10 things on their own, how do you then bring them together in a more holistic way that benefits particularly inland areas, as you've been articulating earlier?
Fantastic. Angus, I think between the two of us, you have hopefully covered everything there.
I think so. I don't think there's anything any of us want to add, but I mean, I could go to the point you were making. I think was an interesting point there of moving them back from the ports, because it was the initial point that Roy McGregor had made, that it didn't matter where it was in almost a 50-mile stretch, as long as it was in the location to do something with it. Is that correct, Roy McGregor? Is that roughly the point you were making?
Yeah, I was probably have some experience of working in Freeports in the Middle East, and I've seen the advantages to the supply chain and the cluster for particular industries. I was really coming from a non-traditional either service business or a business that has to change. I'm very much coming from a new market. As you know, in Scotland, we're going to produce about 60% of the offshore wind. Do we really want that business to be done on the continent and imported? Or do we want to take the expertise into Scotland, to the northeast of England, to Lowestoft, and to be able to compete at the same advantages that they get in Esbjerg or Antwerp or Nantes? We are behind there, and if we really want to be a leader in this new green industry, we need to be competitive, and then we can use the export market as well. So I think it applies very much to manufacturing and less to service. And it's easy to see how new businesses need to be there. But I do understand the car industry there that is going to have to change, or we're going to have job losses, and we're going to have a lack of innovation, which will create job losses if we're not competitive post Brexit as well.
I noticed Alex Salmon's line of the Saudi Arabia of renewable energy being recycled yesterday, which was all part of that sort of sphere anyway. But the other point that's happening at the moment, as you'll know, Mr. McGregor, is that some people are getting contracts, or some companies are getting contracts from the UK government for renewable energy, but then taking the work to the United Arab Emirates and to China rather than to methyl and to varnish. And that's something we should surely be guarding against if people are getting government contracts in the renewable energy sphere.
I'm very much involved in that things, Angus, and I think this announcement that this major investment is going to be made at NEG that you're going to see now is a fight back. What I would say is that the Freeports will help change the mindsets, and sometimes old industries and old practices are holding back an industry, and we're living in the past. We need to live in the future and creating jobs for the future, creating training for the future, creating mindsets for the future. And whether it's in Stornoway or Lowestoft or Hartlepool or Nig on the Cromarty Firth, I think we've got to embrace that. At the moment, we're at a competitive disadvantage. And if we want these new industries to flourish, Freeports is a way that I don't see displacement being the issue. I see as being the UK being competitive in a market where, in my industry, you have plenty of wind compared to Europe. But do we want other people to own the wind, or do we want to own it ourselves?
In politics, we're not short of wind either. Many often charge, but moving on a little bit to Northern Ireland now. Northern Ireland, Roger Pollan, might be in quite an interesting spot, because where the border might be with customs union, single markets and free ports. And I do bear in mind, of course, that UK had free ports to 2012, which died, which is withered on the vine because they weren't being really needed within the large single market. But I mean, what sort of responses can you imagine, or what sort of issues might come up for businesses in Northern Ireland, given the particular set of circumstances they might have in and around the free port policy?
Well, I suppose it just depends how we go about it. I mean, I have to say, we did a number of focus groups and engaged with members on this right across Northern Ireland. And if you wanted to summarise what came across, it was ambition. There's a real ambition amongst business in Northern Ireland, particularly small businesses, to seize opportunities and to get out there and do something with it. The flip side of that is whether that appetite for risk that exists within business is matched by an appetite for mitigating risk and avoiding risk elsewhere in the system here. And I suppose we've had some examples of this. So we've just had what we call the New Decade, New Approach Agreement, which was what got the executive back up and running at the beginning of the year. So we haven't seen the executive had a chance to bed down and really show its ambition yet, because it got overtaken by coronavirus. But prior to that, over the last decade or so, we had pretty much unanimity amongst the 5 parties of the executive around one economic policy that could have been transformational, and that was around corporation tax. And getting the powers for that to come to the executive so that it could then reduce the rate of corporation tax to either match or compete with the Republic of Ireland, which at that time was substantially lower than the rest of the UK, and would have been a formative policy. Unfortunately, though, because of this attitude towards risk and this failure really to grasp it and embrace it and move forward, we got the powers put onto statute at Westminster, and that's where the whole thing finally ran into the sand. So we're still sitting with a huge difference in our corporation tax rate from that of the Republic of Ireland. And I think the same thing, the risk is here. You mentioned earlier in the discussion about, I suppose, the risk of Northern Ireland not getting one of these free ports or getting the opportunity that it affords. We would just see yet again something like we've watched with the south of Ireland, which is where their economy has really taken off because of the policies they've applied there. We might risk seeing that happening to our east in Scotland, England and Wales. So we need to make sure we grasp this opportunity and then mould it to suit Northern Ireland. And I was interested to look at the paper that came out this morning from the government. There was one point in it about the Freeport primary customs sites. And I noticed that they talked to the point you've just been covering there, which is that the government will consider primary customs sites of any size, and these can be in inland locations, provided they can meet strict security requirements, enabling Revenue and Customs and the Border Force to monitor the sites. And the risk there we see is that that might be okay for big businesses, like you mentioned with Ford there, Tim, where they have a secure site and you can give that integrity. But when you come to small businesses then that don't necessarily have that, you run the risk of distorting the market that you're trying to assist. So that's why I think we've come up with the modelling that we have, which is to make the whole of Northern Ireland loosely the Freeport, but then with these specific sites and secure zones within that. So you can meet the objectives that are set out in this paper, but not see regionalised distortions coming into play that either distort on the basis of size of business or geography of business.
Thank you very much, and thanks for that response.
There's one other thing just to add on, I suppose, is that the issue of how that meets up with the between the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Freeport policy just hasn't yet really been tested and discussed. So the challenge there, where there's challenge, but there's also opportunity, because this could actually address some of the issues that the Joint Committee has to deal with, the Joint Committee between the EU and the UK, on how Northern Ireland will operate post 31st December, that actually the free ports may allow the secure zone, the fence, without it being a border, because obviously we're very sensitive to borders in this part of the world. But whereas fences we're generally okay with. So if we have ports and airports with good fences around them that can provide the integrity to allow the business to operate, I think there's real opportunity there. There is a challenge. We need to work our way through that. But if there's the right appetite to risk, then I think we can achieve it.
Yeah, there's quite a lot to chew on in there. So, I mean, basically, the status Northern Ireland has at the end of this will affect how the Freeport might succeed.
It could do. And I think that this is where, we're all in vastly new territory, but I suppose particularly Northern Ireland, because our future relationship has already to a certain extent been determined, whilst the one for the whole of the UK with the EU is yet in flux. So we have the Northern Ireland Protocol sitting there as the underpinning. So we know what our minimum status will be. We may get a better relationship if there's a free trade, zero tariff, zero quota free trade agreement put in place. But at least we know what our underpinning is. And we're trying to work out how would you get an effective free port policy to work within that context that doesn't distort the market unduly with the rest of the island, but nonetheless doesn't leave Northern Ireland behind. And I think the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and all of the spirit that went behind that from both the EU and the UK government and the Dublin government as well and others was very much about trying to assist Northern Ireland to up its game and to be able to pay its way and contribute and actually then just normalise society and the economy. So we see there's an awful lot of moving parts in this, and we see getting this policy right for Northern Ireland in a way that's not divisive could be a real game changer for us.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. We've got about 7 to 8 minutes left in the session. We're doing okay for time. Going to Lloyd Russell Moyle now. Lloyd Russell Moyle.
I guess it's all of you, but Roy, maybe you would be best placed first. How could we've now got the government outline their proposals, but how can we ensure that businesses have enough time to prepare for the introduction of Freeports so that we so that they can hit the ground running, as it were?
I think that's probably too political for me. I'm just a simple Scotsman. You know, I really just want to be innovative to a new industry that needs to be able to compete. And if we want to develop that skills within the UK, you know, we need to be at least on a level playing field. And how the policy is interacted really isn't my cup of tea. I'm just wanting to make sure that the UK, not just Scotland, that we're really competitive to new challenges and new industry and new opportunities, that Freeports will allow us to play on a level playing field.
I mean, is it from a business perspective? I mean, is it a problem if these things all happen at once? Transition with the European Union, introduction of Freeports, is that too much for business to adapt to, or is it vital that these things happen all at once and businesses can just react are hit by all these different things?
I think if I just, you know, where this new industry of green energy, we are at the moment uncompetitive, and Angus touched it in a wee bit there, uncompetitive, certainly with the rest of the world, but we're uncompetitive that the large manufacturing hubs that will produce these components are either made in Denmark, Germany, France, or Belgium. Now, we haven't primed this industry at all. We've had many false dawns of trying to create manufacturing jobs in the UK. And if we want to be a serious player and to produce all electricity from this new industry, we need to be competitive, or what's going to happen is we will have the cheaper price for electricity, but we'll have no manufacturing jobs. And that's where Scotland, England, Wales are feeling the pinch now. So it's a necessity. It's not a variable in my eyes.
Yeah. Tim, I wonder if you've got any thoughts about ensuring that we've got enough time to prepare so that these things work when they're implemented?
Short answer is, and certainly from a UK automotive perspective, is that we have to have a deal with Europe. This is the sort of phase one critical. If we don't, and we go into World Trade Organization rules and tariffs of 4% on components, 10% on cars, our industry is under severe pressure. And then we're into a different ballgame. So right now, in terms of preparation, our companies really are working out on their spreadsheets what is the extra cost if we go World Trade rules, if we don't get a deal, what's the message to the headquarters about further investment. So I think in terms of preparation for Freeport, from looking forward, then I think we have time to prepare for new industries, new technologies, etc. And pretty much as Roy has just outlined there. And I think that's the time scale that we're looking at is current. We're at a knife edge of competitiveness, certainly in the automotive industry. For the future, I think we have to look then at how we use Freeports to help and assist and grow the economy. And I think the energy sector is a very, very topical area to look at first, because that covers so many different bases.
Would I be right then in summarising we shouldn't take our eye off the prize, which is a decent deal with the European Union and other bilateral deals, and Freeports are something that should be developed for the long-term strategy, not just for the immediacy?
I disagree with that, because I think if we want to build this new green industry, it's with us at the moment. We are shutting coal-fired power stations. We're shutting nuclear power stations. Do we really want to import our energy? I mean, this is live today that, you know, one of the projects we have here is Seagrain. Angus touched on it. We've just placed £12 billion of orders in the Middle East and China and Europe for that, with zero going into the UK. We have lost probably in the region of 80,000 jobs. It's immediacy. The Prime Minister cannot say in 10 years' time, we're going to power every household in the UK from electricity, because we're not going to do it if we don't have the investment in manufacturing jobs. We're going to import it, but we're not going to create manufacturing.
Actually, that's good. Roger, I wonder if, I know we're losing time a bit, if there's anything you wanted to add on this.
Not on that point, I think. Thank you, Mr. Rossingwell.
Good. Fantastic. Well then, Angus.
Thank you. We're coming to an end of the session. That's it's been a very useful session. I'm very grateful to everybody who's helped us here in this afternoon. I'm noticing that there's been a lot of mention of wind. I've just checked the grid carbon intensity. At the moment, the UK is using about 33.3 gigawatts of wind. Half of that is gas at the moment. Of power. Half of that's gas at the moment, and the wind contribution at this present time is about 5.1%. So it's about 1.7 of the 33 gigawatts is using. So clearly, there's a lot there. But as Roy was saying, we can't be having those jobs being sent elsewhere. Surely would be one plea to government. Thank you all for this. I've noticed that something else that was said about Freeports, and it's maybe a passing comment. I think it was Roy McGregor that said it as well, that Freeports might be the catalyst for change in the way that COVID has been the catalyst for change, to come on and do these sort of sessions rather than around a table at Westminster. We can now be in our own locations and do that. So it'll be an interesting other aspect of Freeports that I hadn't probably considered, and maybe one that might be worth investigating further at some point. Will they bring around behaviour changes? Forget even the money side from government, forget even the tariff side, but will something around them create a behaviour change? With that, can I thank our four panellists in the first panel there, Chris Starkey, Roger Pollen, Roy McGregor and Tim Williams. All of you have contributed immensely to our thoughts on Freeports, and thank you very much. Hope this isn't the last we see of you, and indeed we might see Mr. McGregor again in happy circumstances in a cup final. Who knows the way Ross County.
Angus, I wouldn't mind a call off the record about Arnish at some point.
Very good. We can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we can move to our second panel, I think. It looks like everybody's in place, I think. Yep, it's looking good. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Again, an illustrious panel, a very illustrious panel. This is from the three governments in Wales, in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. We've got Aidan McMahon, Ivan McKee and Rebecca Evans. And I will let you all introduce yourselves on your own terms. Far be it from me to put words in anybody's mouth here. Starting firstly with Aidan McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Aidan McMahon, Deputy Director at Strategic Policy Division in the Department of Finance. My Minister leads and coordinates on behalf of the Executive in relation to the Freeports policy. Thanks for the invite today, and I'd like to offer my Minister's apologies for not being able to make the session. Thank you. Apologies accepted. Ivan McKee, who I might have met once or twice in the past before.
Yes, Chair. Good afternoon. It's great to be here. And I'm looking forward to talking to you and your committee. Ivan McKee, Scottish Government Minister for Trade, Investment and Innovation.
Thanks very much. We've had some Scottish Gaelic. I wonder if we can have some Welsh now from Rebecca Evans.
Prynawn da, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join you this afternoon. I'm the Minister for Finance and Trefnydd in the Welsh Government, and Trefnydd is our version of Leader of the House.
Very good. We're having it looks like a trilingual session this afternoon of at least two of the older languages of the British Isles being involved, but we'll go with the younger language at the moment. To all, but I'll start maybe with Minister Evans in Wales. What role did your devolved administration play in developing of the UK's Freeport proposals?
Well, I think it's fair to say that engagement thus far has not been satisfactory in terms of the development of the proposals. We're very much open to considering the idea of Freeports, but as yet we don't have the information that we need in order to come to a conclusion as to whether or not Freeports would be good for Wales. And this is partly because we've been really pressed in the UK government for an approach which is based on partnership with a particular focus on developing the evidence base and sharing the analysis with us, but as yet we haven't got to that point. So as it stands today, we're not in a position yet where we can come to a determination as to whether or not Freeports are something that we would support for Wales.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Ivan McKee, how does your experience correlate or differ from Wales?
Very similar. We have had very little information as to either what the shape of the Freeports in terms of the incentives that would be in place and how that would operate, or indeed of the economic analysis and the impact analysis that we would expect to see from HMRC. So until we get that, we're really very difficult for us to make a determination as to whether we see these as adding value. We see benefits potentially depending on how they're configured, and I know you've talked about a range of those already, and we'll come on to talk about those. And as you highlighted in your last comment there, Chair, some of those could be as much around about the signalling, the messaging, and the cluster building effects as other aspects. We'll maybe talk about that in more detail. But we also frankly see a number of risks around economic displacement. It was interesting when you talked to your earlier panel that it was everybody was very positive at the start, but once you start talking about the specifics, everybody's worried that somebody else is going to get an advantage over them. So that's an aspect. There's clearly globally the Freeports have got a bit of a sad reputation for illicit activity and bypassing the law of the land. So that's a concern that we need to be sure that was well looked after, well policed as well. So a number of concerns, but at the moment we really don't have enough information to make take any clear view on this.
I mean, if Freeports come, I mean, is the UK government to Scotland or Wales or even to Northern Ireland, is the UK government going to fund them directly, or will this have to come out of the Scottish government funding and revenues or Welsh government funding and revenues? Is any clarity on that?
Well, sorry, I'll just comment on it briefly. There's a number of parts to that. I mean, if there's a UK-wide customs or reserve tax incentive, then clearly that would apply to everybody. Many of the taxes, of course, are devolved, and then we'd have to make a determination on what to do in that environment. And clearly then if there's incentives coming through in terms of cash for setting up of Freeports, then it's not yet clear whether that would go at the Freeport, whether that comes through Barnett consequentials, or how that would look.
Okay, thank you. Rebecca Evans, before I go to Ian McMahon, you want to come back in?
Yeah, just to add to that, I was in a meeting on this topic with the Secretary of State for Wales and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury recently. And in terms of those elements which are reserved to the UK government, I probed as to how we would look to receive funding for Wales. And the answer there was that the starting point was the Barnett formula, which would obviously not be satisfactory if we were in a position where we have, say, 10 Freeports in Wales, one of which would be in Wales. So we would have 10% of the Freeports, but 5% of the funding as per the Barnett formula. So clearly that isn't an appropriate funding mechanism for this particular piece of work.
Thank you very much. Aidan McMahon.
Yeah, very similar to the two ministers. My minister is interested in any policy that can help to grow the local economy and remains open-minded on Freeports. But in terms of the role of the executive in developing the policy proposals to date, I think it's fair to say that it's been very limited at best. Our engagement has largely been in relation to discussions on the latest developments from a UK government perspective, and we've not really had that role in helping to shape the policy from the outset. I think our view is that there needs to be greater recognition that given the levers with Freeports, and in particular those devolved levers, there's a need for the devolved nations to play a key role in how Freeports are taken forward and implemented if they're to be successful. And our minister has stated in correspondence to the CST that it's really important that the executive and indeed the other DAs are not left with a fait accompli in terms of how policy is settled at the end of this process if it is to be successful. We've touched on finances, and again our minister is pressed on this particular issue, asking what level of ambition the UK government has for Freeports in terms of finances. We know that we've heard from stakeholders who say that there needs to be significant public sector investment to make Freeport successful, but we haven't quite got clarity on that as yet.
Okay, some concerning points made there by all three. I'm going to go to Mick Whitley, who's waiting patiently by there. Mr. Whitley.
Yeah, good afternoon, panel. I'd like to ask initially, Aidan, what engagements have you had with the Department of International Trade and the Treasury as the government prepares its consultation response?
I think I got that question in terms of engagement with DIT and more broadly. I think engagement in the beginning, it's fair to say, was probably intermittent. And with DIT, that was the main source of engagement, certainly in and around about a year ago. I think as the policy seems to switch lead within UK government, that main engagement then focused with Treasury. And that has been the sort of mainstay of engagement over the duration of this year, largely. I think engagement is intensified of late, and certainly post a letter from our minister in August, where he sought additional engagement and substantive engagement with the CST. But I think it's fair to say that we would prefer a more substantive policy development role in this process, and that's not one that we currently have. My minister's views is that ultimately, if the UK government wants the executive to be a key decision maker within this process in terms of domestic policies to be utilised, the selection and governance processes to be used, and the overall approach to Freeports, then I think my minister would welcome a fuller role in terms of policy development. And I think the really key point there is about the substance of engagement as opposed to the frequency. The frequency has been very regular with Treasury of late, but it's the substance and the policy development process is the key issue from our perspective.
Thank you. And some questions to Ivan.
Yeah, in terms of engagement, there's been I've had a meeting with Steve Bartley on this recently, and there's been official level engagement ongoing. But at the end of the day, what we're not getting, as I said earlier, is the details on this, the impact assessment, the details around the fiscal shape of this, and we've repeatedly asked for that, and that's very important for us to get that, to understand whether we should be, to what extent we should engage with this policy. And I think it's worth making the point that the way we see it is that this policy is at one level, it's hard to escape from the conclusion that something that's been pulled out as a kind of shiny squirrel to draw attention away from all the other bad stuff that's going on in the trade arena, vis-a-vis the relationship with our largest trading partner in the EU. And frankly, if we stayed in the EU and cancelled Brexit, we wouldn't be having this problem or this discussion. So it's very much a sticking plaster on what is a huge gaping wound, and the damage that's inflicted on Scotland's economy is significant and well documented. And this really doesn't do anything to resolve that, other than kind of try and create a bit of a distraction.
Finally, Rebecca.
Yeah, it's a similar situation here in Wales. There was some engagement towards the start of the year, but obviously COVID impacted very much on that. So there was a long void following the early engagement. And since then, there has been some more engagement. Again, we had to write to the UK government back in August to get that started again. But it's been very superficial. So what we don't have, and I think it's the same across all the devolved nations, we don't have access to the information, the analysis, the impact assessments and so on. Our understanding is that that's because the UK government is currently quality assuring that work. But, you know, we can work with the raw information and you know, take it with those advisory notices, but what we really do need is access to the information that we can start to take a considered and informed view on this policy then.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Craig Williams, you've intimated that you might want to come in. Do you still wish to come in?
I'll come in a bit later, Chair.
Okay, that's fine. Ototemi.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Minister McKee. You've previously said that you would like more clarity from the UK government about different aspects of the Freeport proposals. This includes the possible economic benefit and impact on climate change and inclusive growth? Do you now have the information that you require?
No, I've just said we don't have that information, and as been said, the understanding of the economic logic behind this is essential for us to make a determination on whether it's something we would want to support. So at the moment, the answer to the question is no, and we're pressing for that, and we really need to see that to decide whether we want to take this forward or not.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're finished there too. I'm moving on now to Mark Mingus. Mark, you're waiting patiently and filed.
Indeed, Chair, indeed. If I focus this question in, please, to Minister Evans, what role do you expect to play in the allocation of Freeport status?
Well, given the potential impact of the Freeport statuses on the economy in Wales and the inclusion of devolved policy levers within the scope, we would expect to have a meaningful role in terms of developing both the bidding criteria, but then also in assessing those bids against the criteria. And that's why we've been pressing for some clarity from the UK government on those, so we can start to make those considerations. What we don't want to be doing is to find ourselves in a situation where a policy is already developed and a proposal is already put forward, and then we're trying to have to retrofit the devolved aspects onto that. I think that, you know, all of us can do much better than that, and we can work together to develop the policy.
Great, thanks. And when in your view should the bidding process for any potential Freeport, when should that open?
Well, I think it's important that it's consistent either side of the border in terms of across England and Wales. I know that colleagues elsewhere will have their views on that as well, in the sense that that would allow then joint bids to be developed across borders. If we don't have any consistency in terms of those timescales, it makes it very difficult for the bidding process in terms of those border areas. Do we bid into the England one, or do we bid for Wales, rather than coming up with a a joint proposal, which I think is something we would want to support.
And I mean, the government has initially outlined a proposal of 10 Freeports, but in some of the other evidence we've had, there's been a suggestion of either a greater number or Freeport structured in such a way so you're not really talking about a single site. It could be a Freeport, but it could be over several sites, perhaps incorporating a manufacturing area or incorporating an airport and so on. Do you have any thoughts on that, or what sort of structure would be useful for Wales?
I don't think we have the information that we need to answer that, directly in terms of what would be the optimum number. I don't think the UK government has provided evidence, on the potential costs and benefits of Freeport, so hasn't really provided information as to why 10 would be the number that they think of. I understand it might be to protect the Treasury in terms of the exposure to the costs and liabilities related to Freeports, but obviously more information around that would be really, really helpful to us. We understand that if it were to be 10, then there'd be the potential for one of those to be in Wales, which is just why I take this opportunity to reiterate that point about the Barnett formula not being appropriate, because Barnett being 5% and then 1 in the 10 would obviously be a tenth of the Freeports.
That's great, thanks. And if I ask the sort of that similar second part of the question really to Minister McKee, I know you've got sort of concerns and reservations about Freeports. I mean, you've made that very clear. But in terms of the actual how a Freeport should look, or how you think it would be best structured in order to work for, sort of Scotland's interests, have you managed to give that any thought at the moment?
No, we have. We've done quite a bit of thinking on this. We've had several engagement sessions with the stakeholders and with ports, with businesses, with sectoral interests that to gauge their level of thinking and appetite. I think it really needs to be looked at in the context of wider economic development, and I think this is why it kind of coming from left field as a standalone policy, not joined up to anything else, is a bit of a concern. You need to look at it in the context of everything else on a number of levels. So first of all, in terms of the money you would spend on Freeports, and that's at a UK level and at a devolved administration level, in terms of bang for your buck in economic development, is that the best way to spend it, or are you better spending it elsewhere? So that's one aspect of it. We've done a lot of thinking and work around about the shape of Scotland's economy going forward. We're just about in the next 2 or 3 weeks to publish our inward investment strategy that looks at identifying the sectors where Scotland has strengths. And one of the things that's very, very clear to us that those strengths are built upon essentially our deep academic expertise in a whole range of areas where we're very good. The skills pipeline and the talent supply we have around about those, and to a large extent our natural resources as well. Now, a lot of that points to a high tech, high productivity, high wage, high innovation economy. The traditional Freeport model, where you're importing widgets, bolting them together and exporting them again, doesn't necessarily fit into that model. And very often there are clusters around about those sectors. Obviously, some are in port locations, but many aren't, because I say they're built around innovation centres, they're built in universities, they're spread across the country in different areas. So when you look at where we're trying to go in terms of the shape of the economy, the Freeport model may or may not fit. Now, there are some exceptions to that, and it was great to hear Roy McGregor on earlier, because he's absolutely right. In one sense, the green energy revolution is something that Scotland's at the heart of, and we're very focused on maximising the benefits of that in a Scottish context in terms of manufacture, technology, export potential, investment, and so on. Now, the question then is, what does a Freeport give you that you wouldn't get anyway? The cluster through an enterprise zone or whatever, the clustering aspect and the signalling and the messaging, I think, is one advantage. But again, that's divorced from the fiscal aspects of this. So I think you've really got to unpick it quite a bit to understand at quite a deep level how it impacts upon what you're already doing in your economy for economic development. What are the risks of displacement, which are potentially real and significant, and distort the other work that's going on? And what is the real advantage of a Freeport? Is it the things you get through an enterprise zone anyway, around about rates relief and tax relief? Is it on customs? And frankly, the analysis that we've done shows very, very little benefits in terms of tariff inversion and so on and so forth. Or is it round about signalling in terms of innovation clusters, which there absolutely is value to? It's something we're doing anyway, but those aren't necessarily in those locations. So that's why we're hesitant. It's not that we're immediately negative. We've done a lot of thinking on it. We've talked to a lot of stakeholders. We understand a lot of the pros and cons, but how that fits into the bigger picture is really the unknowns, and that's why we need more information to be able to take that forward to
sure. But I mean, do you think it's perfectly possible that you could turn around and say, actually, we don't want a Freeport in Scotland?
It's possible. Absolutely, it's possible. It's also possible we'll look at it and say that we want to do it, but do it in a slightly different shape. The location thing is interesting. The UK government has put geographical limits around about it. You heard Roy McGregor talking earlier in Scotland in terms of if there's 10 ports across the UK and only one in Scotland in terms of ports per square mile, if you like, then we're obviously disadvantaged in that sense if there's an advantage to be had there. So the geographical limitations may be something we'd look at in a different sense in Scotland because of that. And the sectors we're talking about here, offshore, renewables, etc., are much more spread out. It could be we'll look at it combined with other policies we've got round about, as I said, innovation and enterprise areas. And it could be that we'll look at certainly the devolved taxation aspects of that in a slightly different way. So I think all those questions are open. And as I say, it really depends on what the shape of the offer from the UK government looks like.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. Just jumping over to Aidan now. What are your thoughts on this this subject area?
In terms of sectors, or
I mean, sort of, for example, I mean, from your point of view, what role would you expect the government of Northern Ireland to be playing towards the allocation of Freeport status? Would you want to be picking an area, deciding how a particular Freeport was structured? Was it across one site, two sites, three sites? What elements would you want within that?
I think ultimately the decision still rests with ministers, and the decision hasn't been taken at this point in time. I think similarly to the two ministers, I think we'd want more information about the final product of what would be in the Freeport policy. Local ministers will want to understand the full extent of that, the policy levers that will be available to the executive, and assessing the potential economic costs and benefits, and for what sectors in particular, before coming to any conclusions there. We are carrying out some work, programme work across departments in Northern Ireland to try and understand the benefits of the Freeport model as currently outlined, and conscious that they may change and will change over time. And also then to understand in terms of, for example, the product journeys into and out of a Freeport, the overall economic impact that a Freeport might have. So we're trying to understand that, but I think there's a deficit in information that we would like to bridge with the UK government to try and assist our understanding there. And I think we might have a sort of wider set of parameters at this point in time that might be able to be narrowed in over time. And then we can home in a better way in terms of where we think Freeports could sit within Northern Ireland.
Okay, well, that's great. Thanks ever so much. Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Mix. Craig Williams, I think you're looking to come in now. Am I reading this correctly this time?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, that was particularly fascinating. And if I could perhaps touch on two of the points from Ivan and Rebecca. Rebecca, you mentioned there that you'd be interested, if I'm right, in a cross-border Freeport, or certainly open to that concept. And I just wondered to the panel whether you've had any direct local authority or university engagement and people that have taken part in the consultation. It's 350 bodies, seems to be a lot that's taken part in this. And also, given that the customs and tariff policy is clearly reserved to UK Gov, and that's the main driver for a Freeport, how that you see framing your relationship with the bidding process and going forward. So perhaps Rebecca on the cross-border stuff and local authorities.
Great, thank you, Craig. So if I might, Chair, I will ask my colleague, the Minister for Environment and Transport, to drop you a note which sets out those local authorities and businesses or universities and so on, which have responded in that way to the consultation, because he's much closer to that element of it than I am. What I have a particular interest in is Craig's second point, really, in the sense that although there are those taxes which are reserved to the UK government, non-domestic rates are devolved to us here in Wales, and so this will be a particularly important lever in any future Freeport, I think. So it's important to have that an understanding of potential policy. Policy intent by the UK government. And I think that early discussion on that would be really helpful. And I say that because we had a situation recently with the stamp duty land tax, for example, where the Chancellor made an announcement of changes which were going to come in very quickly. And it would have been really helpful for us to have had some early sight of that decision and early discussion so that we could formulate our policy alongside that, because there's inevitably a direct knock-on impact for us in Wales. And I raised that with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and understandably he pointed to the fact that other UK departments don't always have advance notice as to what the Treasury might be doing in terms of tax changes, understandably. But then my point in return is that it doesn't have a direct knock-on impact for certain UK government departments, health, transport and so on, but it does have a direct knock-on impact to us in Wales. So I think, early discussion, early information sharing is really vital, because, I mean, Welsh Government, and I know my colleagues in devolved nations as well, will always make the point that we are extremely trustworthy when sensitive data is shared with us, and so we are able to have those discussions, I think, in a confidential and trustworthy way.
Are you happy with that, Craig Williams? Any more questions? No. Okay. I can move now to Mark Garnier, and this time I'll have a word with the chairman, Mr. Garnier, that he won't interrupt you when you're asking your questions and making your points.
You just wait until I've asked my questions. You may want to leave. Ivan McKee, perhaps I can turn to you. My sort of the main thrust of my question is really what role can Freeport play in attracting trade and investment into the devolved nations? But what's kind of behind this question is the extent to which you see the devolved nations in the UK and England being allies or competitors And I don't particularly want to open the whole of this independence debate to kind of this particular moment.
Oh, go on.
I knew I couldn't get you shut up, could I? But I think, but there's an important point there, because I mean, ultimately, if a free trade port was opened up, say in Sunderland or that kind of neck of the woods, it's very, very close to you guys, and it may actually have an effect on your the economy of Scotland itself. So as I say, do you see these as a weapon or as part of an arsenal that the whole of the UK can use together? How do you see it working with the other parts of the UK?
Yeah, it's a very fair question. I think this works at a whole layer of levels. So there are situations where we are cooperating very closely with DIT, and I work on promoting Scottish exports and attracting investment day in, day out. So very often we're working closely with DIT. Very often, it's particularly on inward investment, we're competing with our friends and colleagues in Wales, Northern Ireland, the Northern Powerhouse, the Midlands Engine, and so on and so forth. And that's the way things are. Within Scotland, there'll be parts of Scotland that compete with each other. Glasgow and Edinburgh forever competing on all kinds of stuff. And frankly, if you take that to another level, when you go and talk to the Commission in Brussels, they see it as Europe versus China versus the US versus India. So this allies versus competitor thing it plays out to all of those levels, and that is the spirit in which we take part.
So to that extent, then, perhaps if I was in your position as being the minister with responsibility for trade, investment, and innovation, I'd be looking at which areas I could be sort of specifically working on. So do we want to identify that? Obviously, you're brilliant at Scottish whisky, and you've got £4 billion worth of experts every year. But what other areas could you potentially do? Do you, if you are going to back a particular type of industry, do you see therefore Freeports as being part of that arsenal that you need in order to be able to support that?
Potentially, yes. And I think it goes back to what I said earlier. We've clearly identified where we've got strengths. You'll see our inward investment plan in the next 2 or 3 weeks, which identifies 9 core subsectors where we see we've got strength on a global basis, and where we're going into bat for Scotland. And whatever the Freeport shape is going to be, that's why it's so important to understand what that shape looks like, because you're right, it's part of the toolkit. It's not a magic bullet, a silver bullet, or even a magic wand. It's something that you could or could not deploy as part of that arsenal, along with innovation zones, along with with enterprise zones, along with innovation centres, along with other incentives we may put in place, along with investments we put in to support specific sectors, specific technologies, and so on and so forth. So all of that is part of the toolkit. The Freeports may assist there. And as I said earlier, it may even just be by virtue of signalling that you're building a cluster around about a particular set of assets in a part of the country in a particular sector, or it could be there's fiscal advantages there. So yeah, absolutely, it's one tool in the toolkit, and that's why it's so important we understand what that tool is. Is it a hammer, a screwdriver, or what is it, so that we know how we're going to use it or not?
Yeah, no, and also I think the other point about this is it's a very specific part of a toolkit, but it can be used either specifically for trying to develop, as you say, clusters, or to try to support sort of industrial sectors and this kind of stuff. But then when you look at it in terms of trade policy, so forgetting that kind of sort of economic side of it, but looking at the trade policy side of it, do you think it's a bit of a red herring when you compare this with other things like free trade agreements? Would it be better to get free trade agreements, or would it be better to try and sort of undercut that by having free trade ports?
It's a complex environment, obviously, and obviously I'm closely involved with watching what the UK government's doing on FTAs. We're not as engaged as I'd like to be, but we certainly see what's happening. I won't rehearse the argument again about if we hadn't made the mistake on Brexit, we wouldn't be in this situation. But it's part of that landscape. Understanding how that plays out is important to watch. Clearly, it'll depend on the scenario. Now, FTAs, effectively what the UK government is delivering at the moment, is largely replicating the FTAs that we're losing with third countries as a consequence of Brexit, and they're kind of working their way through those to get us back to square one, if you like. Beyond that, the analysis we've done on US, NZ, Australia, etc., we don't see much in the way of benefits that adds a whole lot to Scotland's economy. the export, the trade promotion stuff, I mean, our export plan that came out last year had more than 100 actions in it, right? And we track those on a regular basis and move forward. And that's a whole range of things, right? So that I could go through here, but we don't have time. So delivering on that export growth is part of how you do that. It's through a whole series of actions across a whole range of activities. Can Freeports help that? Maybe, again, we need to see the shape. The FTAs help that. Depends on what it is and what you're giving away and what you're getting for it. But there's many other things in there, right from market access barriers, how you do your promotion, through to how you organise your resources internationally, through to how you support exporters with advice and guidance, through a whole range of things that are all part of that picture.
Yeah. Rebecca, do you want to add anything to that and speak up for Wales?
Yeah, I would certainly add that in terms of the the competitive nature and so on, displacement is a real concern for us in Wales. So in Wales, 1.7 million people live within 25 miles of the border with England, and one of our concerns about Freeports would be that potentially there could be the displacement of jobs and wealth from less affluent areas to areas which are already affluent or more affluent. So that's a concern. And obviously, as Finance Minister, I have a concern in growing our tax base here in Wales as well. So I wouldn't want to see good quality jobs moved across the border and the people moving across with them. So that we have to be very mindful of displacement as we take forward these policies as well. And, if it was a choice between free trade agreement with Europe and Freeports, then obviously we take the FTA with Europe every time.
That's very interesting. Aidan, do you want to add anything from the point of view of Northern Ireland?
Yeah, I think just in terms of the Freeport policy, I think there's just a lot of variables still to be settled there. So it's hard to sort of, if you like, rank the Freeport perspective, Freeport policy in terms of other industrial development tools. I would say that from a Northern Ireland perspective, and with the NI protocol in place, there are concerns from the Northern Ireland Executive about how the Freeport policy will be delivered within Northern Ireland, and if there will be differences in Northern Ireland vis-a-vis other Freeports across the rest of the UK. And that's an area of concern that we've raised with the government and would like more information on. So something definitely that we're focused on from a Northern Ireland point of view.
Luke, thank you. That's very, very helpful. Angus, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks very much, and almost interruption free there. You did make an interesting point though, which got me thinking. You said you didn't want to mention the independence point, and I thought of the independent Republic of Ireland, and you mentioned Sunderland as well, being close to Scotland, which might be independent in the future, hopefully, of course. But to Aidan McMahon, the question I would want to ask, just based from those two thoughts I had from listening to Mark Garnier, has there been much reaction in the Republic of Ireland, the independent country next door, to the idea of Freeports in Northern Ireland? I mean, are Freeports of any interest at all? Because I haven't heard mentioned from political friends in the Republic, or indeed seen anything in the Republic's press, but I don't look at it that closely. So I'd be interested to know what the thoughts are in the Republic for Freeports coming to Northern Ireland. Has there been any tremor at all?
I have to admit, and maybe that's a sign. I haven't heard or seen any particular narrative from the Republic in relation to Freeports. We had some stakeholder engagement over the summer in Northern Ireland, where we virtually brought Treasury across to speak to over 80 stakeholders, often across a number of different sessions. And I don't think that issue ever came to the fore, I have to admit. So I'm not quite sure what the thoughts are in the Republic in relation to Freeports, and something I'll certainly look into.
If you do find any answers, it'd be interesting to maybe write to the committee with that answer. I would be fascinated to know. Perhaps the success of independence in the Republic, I might say, is such that they don't bother, but I wouldn't say that at all. I'll just leave that point hanging there. Aidan McMahon, can I further probe and see to what extent do you think you expect to tailor the Freeports package, and what would you want to see differently? Has then much thought been done in Northern Ireland to what business in Northern Ireland might want? What would be the strengths you could play to there? Or is that thinking, given what Minister McKee and Minister Evans were kind of saying, that the lack of detail makes that thinking difficult at the moment?
I think that's it. I think tailoring an NI Freeport to suit our own specific needs is something that was certainly raised with Treasury, and Treasury have indicated they're open to further discussions on this matter and how that could be achieved. We've talked about the potential for a variation in the Freeport offer in Northern Ireland in terms of size, in terms of scope, and I see some of that being reflected potentially in the consultation document that was published today. I think it's fair to say that there is some sort of listening ear to that, but whether that materialises in any real change is difficult to say. I think there is some acceptance that a final model could be a bit different in Northern Ireland given our unique circumstances. That said, it's important in order to attract trade investment that Freeport Northern Ireland, as I've said previously, is not at a competitive disadvantage to other Freeports across the UK. We need to be able to align the Freeport policy with other policy levers being used by the executive to attract trade and investment into Northern Ireland. So it is important to have that flexibility, but it's also important, and I think it's been raised by the two ministers, that in terms of a level playing field, no one Freeport is disadvantaged versus the other to any great degree.
I mean, with your situation in Northern Ireland, with single market and with customs union advantages, have you been looking at Freeports elsewhere in Europe to see what you might do there? Because there are some Freeports still around the European Union, and is that an area of interest for you guys? Would be in a different situation from the Welsh and Scottish situation, presumably.
Yeah, we have looked at that a bit and continue to do so. I think what we see from Freeports that are in existence in Europe, they tend to have been there for quite some time and tend to be a legacy before accession for most of those countries. So I think there potentially is some lessons there, but I don't think there's any silver bullet that we could replicate in the Northern Ireland sense that would necessarily give it real and much more weighting. That said, we're taking forward a bit of a programme of work looking into that. That still has to conclude, and I think it ties into where the UK government eventually goes on this policy and what we think we can roll out in the Northern Ireland sense in relation to that.
Thank you. If I can turn to Wales and Minister Evans. Earlier, we had Tim Williams on the Welsh Automotive, CEO of the Welsh Automotive Forum, talking about Freeports. I mean, what thought are the Welsh government given of a sort of Freeport status to complement the car industry, perhaps in particular, or any other industries? My question is really, I was trying to guess where you might be going, you're thinking, but where has your thinking gone in around this? If they come to you and, you've still got many questions that the UK government hasn't answered, but probably like Minister McKee, you've done some thinking onwards and engaged with sectors. What sort of direction do you see that going in for Wales?
As I say, we find it very difficult to get access to the information that we need to, to really set out what our proposals might be if we were to move to have a Freeport in Wales. So I don't think that we're at the point yet where we could say anything with confidence about which sectors that we would particularly be looking to support, or whether we would want to take that kind of sectoral approach. But what I will say is that generally we have a number of large important sectors here in Wales which we are concerned about. One being the automotive industry and the impact that Brexit will have on that sector. It's a major employer for us here in Wales, and part of our what's thus far been a success story in terms of that sector. Clearly, coming to the end of the transition period is going to be difficult for that sector. So that would be one of the ones in which we would, want to be entering into more in-depth conversations with in terms of the way forward. But we haven't come to a view on that yet.
Thank you very much. And similar to Minister McKee, if you assume some variables from the UK government, have you managed to even do that in the absence of being given anything definite as to what might possibly come from it? We heard obviously Roy McGregor's views earlier. What's your own thinking?
Yeah, and just for answer that, just on your question before last, if you like, our understanding is that there is still a Freeport in Shannon, and that there's about 80 Freeports across the EU. I was in Hamburg last year, and they stopped being a free port because the cost and activity involved maintaining that customs border was more than it was worth in terms of the advantages they got. So clearly there's ups and downs to those.
And if memory serves me right, Shannon is a free port almost just in name as opposed to practice.
So in terms of the question round about sectors, well, I've done 4 one-hour engagement sessions with different sectoral groups and interests over the last few weeks, and officials have done other engagement as well. And I have to say it's very, very evolving thinking. It's very early, but there's a number of things are coming through that we'll see where they go and whether we can explore them in more detail. The obvious one we've spoken about, and you've had Roy on already, is round about offshore, because that's a combination of a growth sector, technology sector, but also a sector that's got a footprint that is a port because of the nature of the sector. So it ticks those boxes. Some of the other sectors clearly we've got strength in Scotland are not in that kind of port location. So if you're talking about precision medicine and drug discovery or these kind of areas, quantum photonics, they're less obvious that the port location would be of value. An interesting one is perhaps around about digital, where clearly we've got huge strengths in Scotland, but when you start looking at that through the perspective of data centres, and you look at international connectivity on data lines and data centres powered by renewable energy and these kind of things, you start to get to an interesting area where there's potentially something there. There's also some stuff potentially round about just in terms of logistics, and if there are sectors where we've got import and export going on because because of the nature of the sector and complex supply chains, life science might fall into that space. So there's a number of things where there might be something, but it's very early days to be able to nail that down. We look forward to engaging further with stakeholders as the shape of the UK offer becomes clearer, and we'll have a wee look and have further discussion with them to see where there may be value there.
Given the thinking and the work you've done, and presumably in Wales as well and elsewhere, perhaps as you wait for the UK offer, which is taking its time, as you put it, the UK offer, would it not be better to have the Scottish Government's demand, the Welsh Government's demand, the Northern Irish Government's demand, as opposed to waiting for them?
Well, I mean, the demand would be clear. We want at least a balance share of any money you're giving out, and we want reserved taxes to be applied. Anything you're doing there to be applied at least in equal measure across Scotland, and for us to be able to make the decisions working with stakeholders in Scotland as to how and where those free ports should be, with some freedom given our geographical challenges to be able to be flexible on that. So I mean, that would be the position. I think we've articulated that certainly in the discussions we've had with UK government. So yeah, I think that's the answer to the question, and we'll see what they come forward with.
Okay, before I move to Martin Vickers, Aidan McMahon or Minister Evans want to add to that last point. Are you happy enough?
Yeah, just to add in terms of what our demands would be, it would be absolutely about fair funding for any free port. So over and above the Barnett formula, that wouldn't be the starting point for us, despite what we've discussed with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury so far. So, we need to have further conversations about an appropriate funding mechanism. And then also ahead of terms to set out the clear roles and responsibilities for Welsh ministers, Secretary of State for Wales, and wider UK government ministers, including the agreed governance arrangements around bidding and implementation, also setting out the key principles alongside each of our parties' roles and our responsibilities and our powers. So, essentially proper clarity and proper engagement and an understanding of what is expected of each partner.
Okay, thank you.
And then maybe just, I would agree with both ministers' comments, but maybe just on top of that would be more information in around the tax levers. What tax levers that have been selected as part of the consultation process that are in there, why they've been selected, a little bit of more information of what's in there. But importantly, about the tax levers that have not been selected, I think we'd like to see some more information about, for example, why corporation tax wasn't included in the offer, and is there the potential for other taxes to be included within that as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all three for that. Waiting patiently by is Martin Vickers, who's going to come in there.
Thank you, Angus. We've touched on what economic assessment has been carried out by the evolved administration. So I'd just like to dig a little deeper into that, because Minister McKee, as I understood from your earlier comments, the Scottish Government hasn't done any detailed analysis of the economic impact of the Freeports. But I just wondered whether you intend doing that, because we know from our previous hearings that there are Scottish port operators who do see advantages, and wondered what sort of work the administration would be doing with them.
Well, it's hard to evaluate something when you don't know what it is, and that's the problem we've got. So at the point where we see what the UK government is proposing, given that so much of it falls under reserved competence in terms of the tax levers and so on, then we'll see what the offer is and we would do an assessment. And frankly, we've also been asking for Treasury to let us to share their assessment with us, their impact assessment based on where they think this is going, and we haven't seen that either. So that's the issue we've got. We've done extensive stakeholder engagement, as I said, and listening very carefully to what stakeholders are saying. So we're very well aware of who's expressing interest and where they're coming from on that, and we'll continue that dialogue. But we obviously can't assess something when we don't know what it is.
Rebecca Evans, would you like to comment on the economic impact assessments that the Welsh administration has carried out?
Yeah, we're in very much the same position as Scotland in terms of not being able to quantify really what it is that we're assessing when we don't have a proper sight of what the plans might be. At the same time, though, we can continue to do our thinking about ways in which policy might diverge. So it's the Freeports will inevitably, I think, evolve in different ways, and we need to be considering in Wales how we do so in a way which respects the requirements of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. As a government, we have a really strong priority for fair work, and also we're very, very cognizant of our responsibilities around the environmental agenda as well. So all of those things will be part of our approach to Freeports, should it be something that we feel that we're able to support when we receive the data.
If you were to decide that it wasn't to the advantage of Wales, and yet England was motoring ahead with Freeports, would you see that as a disadvantage?
This is one of the problems. So this is potentially could have serious implications in terms of that displacement of jobs and wealth, which we were talking about earlier, which would be of real concern. So I think it's in all our interests to work closely together on this and to share information and thinking and data and modelling and analysis and so on. It baffles me really as to why we are struggling so much to get the information that we need.
Aidan, do you have any comments on the assessments?
Yeah, I'll maybe just come in. We know from a DA perspective that Treasury are carrying out some economic modelling at the moment, and we expect to get sight of that, but we haven't seen it as yet. So Treasury are doing some economic modelling to work out what they think the aggregate impact of Freeport's policy will be across the UK, but we also understand that we'll be able to drill down to some degree in terms of the DAs and when levers are basically pulled or not pulled, and depending on the sort of final shape of that Freeport package. So we know that work is going on within Treasury, and we are really interested to see it and hope to see that soon. I think from our perspective, we have our own work programme. The Department for the Economy is carrying out an assessment as well in terms of the potential impact of Freeports in Northern Ireland. I guess what the two ministers have alluded to, the parameters of around that work is quite wide at the moment, and it can only narrow as we get more and more detail from the UK government in terms of the final shape of the policy. But I think in a Northern Ireland perspective, it's hoped that the local economic assessment in conjunction with the Treasury modelling will allow ministers to take a more informed view of the likely costs and the benefits of a Freeport policy, and what might be required to make it successful in Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Angus.
Thank you very much. And now we go to Mark Mingus, as ever. Mark.
Angus, you're letting yourself down today. You normally give fabulous geographical descriptions of where we are in the country. So, I mean,
I was waiting for your words. I was waiting for your words.
No, that's fine.
In the lovely part of Lancashire called Fylde.
Indeed.
Mark Menzies waiting patiently by.
Indeed. I mean, before I move on to my primary question, it's just really, if I could just come back to this issue, which is quite concerning me, and about the level of information that appears to be going to the devolved governments. And I think, if I could really sort of focus in on you, Ivan. I mean, you have raised this, a few times. I mean, when have you started to ask this information? So what's the sort of length of time that the government of Scotland has been asking for this information?
Well, since the Freeport idea was floated, we've been trying to understand what it is and been asking for more details on that. So I need to check exactly how long that is, but obviously a period, a good number of months, if not years, a year or two perhaps. I'm not sure, but certainly a good number of months.
And what kind of dialogue have you been having, with ministers or senior officials? Can you describe that? Because I think this is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a conversation with Steve Bartley just in the last few weeks on this. Official level conversations have been going on. Obviously, prior to that, on an ongoing basis, round about what information is available. I mean, obviously, at UK level, the policy is developing. So, do they have answers to all those questions? Probably not. And as we said earlier, even if the Treasury did have answers to all those questions, then much of it they wouldn't be sharing very widely anyway. But in terms of the question to us as to, do we think they're a good idea? How would they play in Scotland? What would the impact be? And that's the information that we need to get. And as I said, Treasury will be running impact assessments on that. So understanding, and as Minister Evans said, we're quite comfortable looking at that in a more raw state and working with them on that. But we haven't seen that. I mean, I don't know if that's because they haven't decided how it looks. I'm assuming they've done various analysis of different scenarios. Is it because the benefit of it is it doesn't have an impact that's worth talking about and they don't want to share that at this stage? I don't know. But certainly the independent analysis, I think Suffolk University did some work on this, and we're struggling to find areas, certainly on the tariff side, where tariff inversion or customs advantages made any real difference at all to anything. So the advantage is more likely going to come in the enterprise side rather than the customs side.
I mean, you talked through, earlier, a very impactful vision to the sort of sectors that you wanted to focus in on terms of economic development and the benefits you thought that could bring. Have you submitted a submission to Steve Bartley to say, when you're formulating Freeport policy, this is what we want from a Scottish perspective, and this is why? Have you done anything like that?
We've written to say this is what our concerns are, and these are the things that are important to us, and these are the things that we want you to take on board when you're doing that. So that's been laid out in terms of, as I said, where we're coming from in terms of our economic development focus, round about net zero and green jobs, round about inclusive growth, round about including all of Scotland, round about the various things that we've spoken about. So that's been articulated, and we continue to do that.
Yeah, no, does Minister Evans, do you want to add anything to that, what I've just been asking about?
Well, we're just very much in the same place, really. It's been over 12 months now since we've been asking for greater involvement and for greater sharing of information. I think it's probably fair to say that we have no access to anything that's not already in the public domain. That's the level of information that's been shared with us. And at the same time, we have also set out in writing our concerns about the potential of Freeports and what that might mean from Wales and what's important to us as well. So UK government's aware of our views.
That's good. And just to finish, Chair, I'm also very conscious of time. If I just focus in on you, Minister McKee, to begin with, but again, you've talked about the risks of displacement that you believe a free port could generate. What sort of solutions do you think could be put in place to help mitigate those risks?
Well, I suppose it depends who you're asking the question to. I mean, if you take the scenario that was posted before, where something in the northeast of England that had a significant impact on areas of the economy that were important to Scotland, then clearly, as and when that happened, we would need to look at the specifics of that and figure out how, or if we were going to respond accordingly. If it was in a sectoral basis and a sector that didn't have a huge impact on us, then obviously it's less of an impact. If you're asking the question at a UK level, and again, we need to consider this as well at a Scottish level, the effect of distortion. So if you do something somewhere, what does it do to the rest of the economy? Then we would hope that that would be part of the economic impact analysis to be able to assess that, because there are some advantages obviously to having the cluster, but if what you're doing is shutting businesses in one place to reopen them somewhere else, then clearly that's not what it should all be about.
Good. And Minister Evans?
I would just echo those same points really, and just emphasise the importance of coming to a shared agreement and shared understanding with the UK government about our relative roles, or respective roles and responsibilities, and working together to if we do decide to go forward with the Freeport in Wales, then to do so in a way which has a kind of level playing field underneath it, in a way which is fair for all of us.
Okay, that's fine. And Aidan, sorry to finish off with you from a Northern Ireland perspective.
Yeah, I think displacement's a key concern. I know there's some disputes about the study, but the Centre for Cities estimated that some 35% of job creation in enterprise zones was down to displacement. And this feels like a really difficult place to be in with regards to Freeport. So I think there needs to be measures, whether that's in relation to the bidding process that's being rolled out for England, or in terms of the actual levers that are put in place that drive those towards genuinely new economic activity, as opposed to displacing activity that's already taking place.
Okay, that's great. Thanks ever so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Mr. Myers. Just a final point, Aidan McMahon, there you mentioned the 35% jobs in displacement in enterprise zones. You might not have the source for that at the moment, but if you could, in writing, just let us know the source of that. That's quite an interesting point.
I think it's the Centre for Cities study, but I'll send that through.
Thank you. That's good. Appreciate it. Thank you all for your time. We've come to the end of our evidence session. We're finishing on time, which is very good. It'll be good for your diaries, I'm sure, ministers as well. I mean, there's an overarching message I think I'm taking from this, and maybe a message that UK government wants to hear in particular, and maybe wants to rectify, that you're sort of saying, all three of you, that there are glaring gaps in the information you've got in Northern Ireland. Wales and Scotland are sort of singing from the same hymn sheet of lack of details, and perhaps some of the lack of details are understandable, but the general information is not as understandable. And you'd want that to be ameliorated very quickly so that you could engage with this more meaningfully and see what it actually would mean for your areas, for your nations. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all very much. It was great to see you all. It was good to start in Welsh and Gaelic. Maybe an example for our other members to learn some of the older languages of the current United Kingdom going forward. It's always good homework. I feel I'm looking particularly at Mark Menzies at the moment, and hopefully the next time he sees Minister McKee, he'll have a few words of Gaelic, and perhaps if he sees Minister Evans, I might have some words of Welsh as well. So I've got some homework myself. And indeed, thank you, Aidan McMahon. Thank you, Minister McKee. Thank you, Minister Evans, for your time today. It was very interesting, and there were some powerful messages given there. Thank you all. Fiscal Mallet.